fellow members of the National Society Descendants of American Farmers. My name is Glenn Martin, and this is Renee Hamilton, and we are the military co-directors for your society. I want to welcome you to the first Zoom meeting dedicated to honoring individuals who served in the U.S. Armed Forces during the Vietnam War era. The United States Vietnam War commemoration was established to recognize the men and women in uniform during that time, whether they served at home or abroad. And as a commemoration partner, the NSDOAF will be holding a number of these Zoom meetings to implement the goals of the program. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge our President National, Janice Regal, and the board members, directors, and ambassadors that have joined us today. Renee and I are pleased that our society leadership is so well represented. Thank you. We are being joined by 5 NSDOAF members today who served during the Vietnam War era. These individuals chose to don the uniform and preserve the lands their farmer ancestors toiled upon so tirelessly. We are delighted to have honorees from the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps for both the officer and enlisted ranks, and most importantly, both men and women. Before we begin, Renee and I felt it would be fitting to open our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. So we ask everyone to stand, if you're able, and join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation,
under God, indivisible,
with
liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
I hope that's shared screen because we worked on that today.
As former Navy enlisted, it will be my privilege to introduce our enlisted honorees, and Renee, a former Air Force officer, will introduce the officers. I'll now yield the floor to my co-director, who will introduce our first honoree.
Good evening, everyone, and it is an honor to be here and present our first honoree, retired U.S. Air Force Brigadier General Edward Rodriguez, Jr. General Rodriguez holds national number 1065. He served 4 years active duty during 1970 to 1974, then served in the United States Air Force Reserves until 1999. Sir, if you will please share with us a few memories of your tour of duty in Vietnam, as well as comments regarding your service to our nation.
Thank you, Renee. I volunteered for Vietnam. I was fresh out of law school and had just finished a federal clerkship in Washington. But I grew up in an Air Force family. My father was a World War II veteran of the Pacific. I volunteered for Vietnam because as a judge advocate, that was a great place to get challenges and opportunities to grow in my profession. My year in Vietnam was August of 1971 to August of 1972. And during that time, I had a full diet of court-martial experience, primarily on the prosecution side. It was a smorgasbord of common law crimes, what we now call white-collar crimes, and things of that nature. It was a good experience professionally, and I was especially happy to have had the mentorship of my 2 bosses, who were both World War II veterans. I regret that I did not speak with them more often and more deeply about their World War II experiences. But as I said, they were great lawyers. They were intellectuals, and I learned a great deal from them that has helped me throughout my my now 53 years at the bar. And as you mentioned, I then had a 25-year career in the Air Force Reserve and was really given the privilege to be challenged as a general officer. And I enjoyed my time both on active duty and in the Air Force Reserve. I will say that Vietnam was, I think, different for everyone, depending upon your service, depending upon the years that you were there. And my experience as a professional was, of course, quite different from the young men in the field. And it's I think about them daily and what they went through, and I'm very proud of their service. And I'm proud of the fact that at least I shared that 1 year in that place with them. Thank you very much, Renee.
I just unmuted you.
Thank you, Renee.
Sorry.
Our second honoree today is James Reagan Clements, Jr., NSDOAF number 1084. James was a combat engineer demolition specialist in the United States Army, serving 2 tours in Vietnam and achieving the rank of Specialist 5. James, thank you for joining us today and allowing us to recognize your service. Could you please share a few memories about your time in Vietnam and anything else you would care to relate about that time?
Thank you very much, Glenn, Renee, and everyone at the National Society of the Descendants of the American Farmers. As Glenn just stated, I am a Vietnam veteran. I do serve 2 tours of duty in Vietnam from 66 through 68 as a demolition specialist, SP5 with the 86 Combat Engineers. I was assigned to the 5th Special Forces Mike Force in Long Hai. I'm currently an active member in the Descendants of American Farmers, the Patrick Henry chapter, the Sons of the American Revolution, the General Society, the War of 1812. I'm an honorary admiral in the Texas Navy. I'm a lifetime member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, and AMVETS Post 115. As an American veteran and the son of a World War II and Korean War veteran, a lot like the general, my father served in the South Pacific for 33 years, continuous war in China throughout the World War II and the Korean War. So I'm obligated to continue to pay it forward on his behalf and all of my other ancestors who I believe have served in every combat situation since the founding of our great nation. Right out of high school at the age of 18, I enlisted in the Army to go to Vietnam and to stop the spread of communism. We were led to believe at that time that if Vietnam fell, the domino effect would lead to the spread of communism around the world. After finishing my basic training at Fort Polk, my AIT training at Fort Leonard Wood, I left as a 12B30 demolition specialist. I was quite surprised to realize at that point that I didn't have an assignment. They shipped me up to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I sat up there and drank beer for a couple of months until I finally got a post assignment over in Fort Dix, New Jersey, to participate in the recreation of and the reactivation of the 86 combat engineers that had been deactivated following World War II. And so when I got there, I was the first non-com on the post. We had a company commander, a battalion commander, and you know, the rest of us were there to open up old World War II barracks and build a new training camp and get prepared to ship out as a full battalion to Vietnam. We had no combined training prior to that for all of our people. And I was really quite surprised by the fact that I was sent up there to do this when almost 98% of every person that went through basic training or AIT at that time, it was the big push, the buildup in Vietnam. And they were all shipped off immediately after graduating from AIT to Vietnam. I spent the next 6 months in Fort Dix helping to recreate the 86 Engineer Battalion. And at the completion of that, we shipped out from the Oakland Navy base there. I was put on a troop transport out of Oakland, along with 5,000 other 18-year-old kids. I mean, when you think about war, you have to realize that we're all going to war. We're fighting as kids for the government of our country. And that's what we realized quickly when we got over there. The oldest over there was in his 30s, maybe. Our commanding general of engineering command was probably in his 40s, but the rest of us were teenagers. And the trip over to the Vietnam from Oakland on a troop transport with 5,000 other teenagers, you have to appreciate that none of us had seaworthy legs. We were all seasick the day we sailed under the Golden Gate Bridge. And for the next 18 days until we arrived in Okinawa, it was probably as difficult a time period as anything else I experienced in Vietnam. The smell of the long lunch lines in the hall when you're waiting to go down for chow in a 100-degree tunnel with 1,000 other guys lined up to eat. It's horrible. We arrived first in Okinawa, Japan, and perhaps this is a little sensitive to some people, but 5,000 troops bailed off the ship, went into town, and quickly found every bordello and bar that they could find in Okinawa. Half of them were probably put in the brig that night before we loaded back up to ship out to Vietnam. And not knowing what was going to happen in the future, we were happy to have that little layover there. My unit, when we arrived in Saigon, our battalion, all of our trucks and equipment were right there on the dock for us. We didn't even have to go into any barracks or anything to get a layover for that. In Saigon, we loaded up on our trucks and we drove to Long Binh base, which was our headquarters for the 20th Brigade and the 86th Combat Engineers. That was probably at that time a full day convoy of thousands of trucks and men making that trip. Today, you can make it in 2.5 hours by taxi from Saigon to the same facility where we had our base there at Long Binh. Long Binh was a brand new operation that we built there for our headquarters operations in the southern area of the Saigon, south, I think it was called I-Corps, but anyway, our headquarters was there, but I was in D Company of the 86th Engineer Battalion. And by being in D Company, that meant I never went to Long Binh again. They shipped us out as immediately into the Mekong Delta. And for the next 2 years, I lived in tents and in the swamps down in the Mekong, doing what I was trained to do, blow things up. Actually, the majority of the time I was there, I went out on TDY. That means temporary duty yonder. You'd get an assignment to go out someplace and help another unit with something, and I just have to go out and blow up a bridge or disarm some booby traps or things of that nature. Long Binh was, if you're familiar with the things that took place during the January 1968 period of our history there, that was Tet. Tet, most of you probably have heard about. Tet was really widely publicized worldwide because of the large uprising of the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army trying to surprise all of the bases at one time throughout South Vietnam with an attack on January 30th into the 31st. The attacks continued really for about 3 or 4 months, but fortunately I was stationed down in Long Hai with the 5th Special Forces. And the 5th Special Forces had over 1,000 Cambodian and Vietnamese mercenaries called the Montagnards that they had in their camp. So I'm on a camp there, and I've got 1,000 mercenaries surrounding it for my protection. So the Viet Cong didn't take us by surprise, and we didn't suffer any great losses due to that. But that was quite a military event that the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army tried to enact at that time. They literally hit every base and every command center in South Vietnam on January 31st of 1968. But what most people are not aware is that we've been having Tet offensives for a couple of years before that. In 1967, the Tet offensive that hit Long Binh blew up our entire military supply dump there at Long Binh, and a lot of guys were killed at that point. But I was again off in a small swamp land down in the Mekong someplace and didn't experience that damage. But Mike Force, if you have never heard of them, I'm sure you'll know that this was the 5th Special Forces. The 5th Special Forces are a phenomenal group. All of the Special Forces are a phenomenal group. Anything you've ever heard about the Special Forces is grossly understated, including John Wayne. You know, John Wayne played a Special Forces commander at that time, and I tell you what, he did a good job, but those guys were pretty tough. You know, with the defeat of the Tet Offensive in '68, that changed the entire complexion of the war in Vietnam. America suddenly became up in arms about our fighting in Vietnam. All of the students were protesting our participation and involvement there. And it changed the complexion of the war dramatically at that point. The commanding general decided to send over another 100,000 troops and additional buildup at that moment. But, you know, it was changing very rapidly. I feel fortunate, actually, that I was able to get out of Vietnam in July of 1968, and I came back to the U.S. Through the Oakland Army Terminal, and the first thing the Army did is they gave me a brand new green uniform with all of my military patches on it, and said, "Remember, the chaplain says, remember, you've always got a home here." And so I walk out of the gate at Oakland in this military uniform, and I immediately stripped it off on the street, put on my civilian clothes, and headed to the San Francisco airport to catch a flight to San Diego to return home. I was as concerned about going through San Francisco airport as I was 2 years in Vietnam. But anyway, as a closing here, I'll just point out that I have dedicated my purpose in life to supporting all of our veterans and active duty military that are returning from the war zones. I created a 501c3 called the Central Texas Returning Heroes, and we have donated tens of thousands of dollars to the Returning Heroes home in San Antonio at the Center for the Intrepid. And that's probably the most important contribution I've done in the last 50 years. Upcoming events that I will be participating in, if you're not familiar with this event coming up on May 2nd in Kyle, Texas, and we will be doing a Vietnam Veterans Memorial replica display, and I'll be speaking at that event. Lieutenant General Kenneth Eichmann will be speaking in the opening ceremony for that event, which will be on May 2nd, and then I'll be doing the closing ceremony on May 7th, and that'll be the actual 3/4 size Vietnam Memorial Wall that will be set up there at the Kyle Lake Kyle City Park. On May 29th, on Memorial Day, I'll again join the Patrick Henry chapter of the Texas Sons of the American Revolution to pay our respects to all of the fallen heroes who paid the ultimate price for our nation. We will be placing over 3,300 flags on all of the grave sites at the Texas State Cemetery. I'll be leading the Memorial Day ceremony, which will include, again, Lieutenant General Kenneth Eichmann. He's graciously agreed to do both of these ceremonies for us this year. And we will also have General George Washington. If you're not familiar with him, that's Mark Collins, one of our wonderful ministers here in Texas that portrays George Washington. He's been in movies and he just knows our history better than anybody I've ever met. And I see two people on the audience right here now that are with me every year in that, and that's Wayne Courreges and Nancy J. And if some of you also have participated in that program, I want to thank you for that. We've been doing this Memorial Day ceremony at Texas State Cemetery now for over 40 years. One last closing comment. In Vietnam, you've all heard the number of 58,000 killed in action. 49,850 of them were white volunteers. 70% of everybody killed in action in Vietnam were volunteers. Only 30% of the people killed in action in Vietnam were draftees. So, you know, that's just some of the numbers. There were a lot of other factors involved there, but I thank you very much for allowing me to make this presentation, and greatly appreciate everything that the National Society of the Farmers of America, which we would all be farmer descendants if you have any history of ancestors going back. My original patriot had about 1,000 acres on the Kentucky River that he farmed. So again, Glenn, thank you very much. Genesu, Renee, everybody else, Davina, thank you.
Thank you very much, James. And I want to thank you specifically for looking out for and taking care of our fellow veterans, our brothers and sisters who come back and maybe don't know what to do or aren't able to do it. I really appreciate that you've basically devoted your life to helping our brothers and sisters. Thank you very much. And Renee will introduce our next honoree.
Our U.S. Marine Corps First Lieutenant Wayne Allen Courreges, Jr. Lieutenant Courreges holds national number C421 and served in the infantry during 1973 to 1976. If you will please share with us a few memories of your tour of duty in Vietnam, as well as comments regarding your service, sir.
I certainly agree with General Rodriguez and his comments. For the time that you served in Vietnam, after listening to compatriot Jim Clements talking about his experience, I did not go in until 73, and things were a lot different then, but you had a lot of the hippie movement was going on at that time, and there's very few that straddled the fence. Either you loved your government and your country and you were going to serve, or you were protesting, it seemed like at that time. For me, I was going to college. I was managing a feed store in Grapevine, Texas, going to school. And I was in a class, and in that class, there were three almost hippie types that were, the Tet Offensive had gone. And the three were saying how glad they were the Army and Marines had gotten killed, and they wished more had. And I got into an altercation, and when I was being led out to the dean's office, one of them said, "If you're so hot about what's going on there, why aren't you there? Sit here." So a few years later, that that comment stuck with me. It was always there. And so there was an opportunity for me to go join. And so I decided that's what I was going to do, is volunteer for the Marine Corps. I went to a naval recruiting office thinking I could join the Marine Corps there. And they tried their best to talk me into joining the silent service at that time, which is submarines. And I wanted to be a Marine. And so I left, much to their chagrin. And I found a recruiter. When I reported, I had to go and take my last 2 classes. I went to the AAFES building in Dallas. And while I was there, I had a friend. Nobody wanted me to go in at this time. And I had a friend that was downstairs. And one of the Marines came up to where I was and said, there's someone named Bohannon downstairs that's telling everybody you're crazy. You have no business being in the Marine Corps. And I told the Marine that let me go talk to him. So I went down and talked to Bo. I said, Bo, I'm gone. This is what I'm going to do. And so from there, about 2:30, I was surprised during Vietnam, just like now, there were very few that were volunteering for the military for the same reasons as of today. And I was taken in front of a light colonel, and he saw that I had 2 classes, Spanish 3 and 4, that I had to take to graduate. And he told me that I had to go take summer school classes to graduate, which I did. And I reported September 23rd, 1973. That date is emblazoned in my brain housing group. And I can remember the platoon sergeant and sergeant instructor meeting us, all of us at the airport, gathering us up like a mother hen, taking us to the cattle car, getting us all comfortable. The door closed on the bus, and my world changed from that point on. So I went to Quantico, Virginia, and to the officers school there, OCS. And unfortunately, I got hurt. But the captain that the platoon I was in was Captain Dewey. And I took a dislike to Captain Dewey because he was one of those Marine officers that when he screamed constantly, and when he was screaming on these long runs, he would pick up rocks and chunk them at the stragglers, and he'd have the spittle coming out and all that, screaming and cussing and all. I didn't have any respect for it. So I got hurt, and you could drop on request after 8 weeks at this time. And so I'd already had the platoon picture taken and all that, and I got hurt and had to recycle. Well, during this time, everyone in the casual platoon, if you were going to recycle, you stayed at the pay grade of an E5, which is sergeant. If you were going to get out, then you reverted back to an E1, which was a private. And so everyone, they would talk at night about how they were staying, and then at the last minute, when they got a medical discharge, they would DOR. And Gunny Russell, I talked to him and told him that this is not why I was in the Marine Corps. So he allowed me, had some friends in headquarters Marine Corps, and I became the gopher. Back in those days, computers had not taken over, and you had the red room and the blue room, and the good guys and the bad guys. And Marine Corps has wars going on all the time, hypothetically. And so I got to know a lot of generals and colonels, and they all knew I hated Dewey. And so the time came, I was the only one left in the squad bay, and Gunny Russell came in and told me I'd gotten my orders. And I asked, who did I get? And he said, you got Dewey. So in the Marine Corps, they make you work for everything you get. So where I'm leading with this is that I was able to get through the training. And Dewey, when I graduated, Dewey took me and 2 other officers to the airport. We had our orders for Okinawa, and I was infantry, as the other 2 were. And in the Marine Corps, you live to be an infantry officer, if you're in the officer ranks, or vice versa in the enlisted ranks. So anyway, he was telling me how proud he was that I had come back and that I was going to Okinawa. And I kept thinking to myself that he bought us a drink and all, and thinking, he says, he said that Courreges, he says, when I heard that you were coming back in my platoon, I didn't like it at all. And for me, I'm thinking, sir, you didn't think you liked it. So, but anyway, I got to Okinawa, and there was an opening in an advanced unit. And something had happened to one of the officers. And so I was placed ahead. In the Marine Corps, you've got 3 battalions rotating constantly. And so I was put in the battalion that was training to get ready to go on the float. Because of that, our unit was called up when Saigon was being evacuated. We were saddled up. We were at Mount Fuji for winter training. We got the word that we had orders to go to Vietnam. So they took us from Camp Fuji in Japan back to Okinawa, where I don't know why the logistics had us routed that way, but that's what happened. And we were off station off Vietnam for several weeks. The 12th Marines went in and actually secured the Air America compound. And our platoon, our company, as many others, were off station on the ships. And my platoon and a second platoon, I was with the 9th Marines. And we were saddled up, ready to go to support the 12th Marines if the Viet Cong came in and started causing problems. My platoon and this other platoon were going to intercede. That did not happen, and the 12th Marines were able to accomplish the mission, Operation Frequent Wind. So from there, I was flown back to what happened from there. Then the next morning, after the operation had taken place, I was up in I was on the USS Denver, and we could see across the horizon all these specks coming from the shores of Vietnam and Saigon. And it turned out to be the beginning of the boat people. And we could not take the boat people on until we had approval from Washington. And so our job was to keep them away from the ships. And we did finally get approval. And we were bringing people aboard. We were throwing everything overboard. The choppers were coming down. We were pushing the choppers overboard, getting rid of everything. And some of the people at that time were really, they had these little tin wafer things that we were tossing, and they were going berserk. And finally, someone came to me and told me that they were gold wafers that had been melted down. And so then I gave the order to go ahead and let them keep that on their person as they were processing through. And we took them to Subic Bay and processed them there at Subic Bay. Then that's the last that we saw of that. From there, I was airlifted back to Okinawa, where I was made the regimental motor transport officer. I was the only one being in the advanced unit that had enough time left to fill that billet. And that's what I did. Along with that, I was cleared for top secret clearance, and I handled all the ComSec gear at that time, issuing the codes and things of that nature. From there, I was transferred to Albany Marine Support Logistics Support Base in Albany, Georgia, and I became the OIC officer in charge of the Bicentennial Flag Pageant and toured the Southeast primarily. I can tell you lots of stories where that's concerned, but I did enjoy that. I was promoted to captain, but I did not retain the rank because I did not join a reserve unit. I'm proud of the service that I gave. I have a son that served in the Kosovo conflict. He was a captain. He graduated from West Point, and he was a chopper pilot that flew in that conflict. I have another son that served in the Marine Corps. I'm proud of his service as well. My dad served in World War II under Patton during the Battle of the Bulge. So for me as a boy growing up, I always had an army pack and pack a lunch, and I was always out in the woods doing something, playing soldier. But I decided I wanted to become a Marine, Jim. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share my story.
Thank you, sir. I just want to make one remark that one of the most important things you did in the service was to be the first step for those Vietnamese refugees to go from oppression and almost certain death to living in the United States of America, where I'm sure their chances and opportunities were much greater. So we appreciate your service and your family service.
If I could say one other thing, when one of my boys was going to Philmont, I was out of shape. I hired a trainer to get me back in shape. And it's toward the end that we started talking. And his mother and father, his mother was pregnant with him, and they were one of the boat people, the evacuees of Saigon. So that was very special for me.
Thank you. Our fourth honoree today is Myra Askew Hall, NSDOAF number Charlie 285. She is a veteran of the United States Navy, yay, who achieved the rank of Yeoman 3rd Class and was stationed in Corpus Christi, Texas during the Vietnam War. She initially didn't want to be honored because she never actually deployed to Vietnam, but as those of us who are veterans know, it's not a decision we get to make. Once you raise your right hand, you go where they tell you, and if that destination is stateside, so be it. Myra, can you please tell us a little bit about what you did during that time and how it felt to be a woman in the military in the 70s?
Thank you, Glenn. It was actually about 50 years ago at this time, I decided to join the military, and Fort Benning is at my back door. So I knew I didn't want to be a WAC. No way. And I was going to school, and a friend of mine from school said, and I was 19, so I was in tech school, and she said, let's join the Navy. And I'm like, okay, we'll do that. This is a textile town, a military town. I knew that I was not really going to go anywhere here. And besides, my mother had a very hard thumb on me, and I wanted to be somewhere else. So in May, I actually raised my hand 50 years ago and said, I do. And I said, send me to the West Coast, because I had a high school boyfriend that lived in California. Unbeknownst to me, West Coast is anywhere west of the Mississippi. So I ended up in Corpus Christi, Texas. And boot camp was an eye-opening experience. I got sick the first week. We were in Orlando, and I called my mama and said, and she said, oh, well, you made that decision. You're going to have to lie in it. So I went to Texas after I got done with boot camp, and I was the 5th woman in a Naval Air Training Command down there. And that was an interesting experience, because those men that ran that squadron, who taught other men how to fly, had not worked with women before. And so they enjoyed taking advantage of the fact that some of us were pretty naive and unaware of the things that they were saying, until we kind of got smart and realized that they're not being very nice at all. So anyway, I worked as basically a secretary in Corpus Christi in the Navy from 1973 to 1976. And I got to where I enjoyed it. I enjoyed working with some of the people, some of the officers that I met and worked with. They were very open and kind, and let me know what was expected instead of expecting it and then telling me I didn't do it right. You know, like I said, I was the 5th woman in. It wasn't a wonderful experience, but I wouldn't trade that experience for the world. It taught me a lot about people. And at the time, I did not realize that we were coming at the end. I thought that everything was done, finished with Vietnam. And it wasn't until probably 10 to 20 years ago that I realized the Department of the Defense said that the Vietnam War wasn't over until 1975. So my service fell into that, and I'm like, yeah, but I didn't go to Vietnam. But people say, well, but you still served, and that's what makes a difference. And I want to thank the President National and all of the officers and all of the members of this organization for being aware of veterans and honoring them. And I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Myra, and thank you again for agreeing to join us today. I also went to boot camp in Orlando, so we've marched on the same grinder and eaten in the same chow hall.
Awful stuff.
Renee will introduce our final honoree of this first NSDOAF Vietnam War commemoration Zoom meeting.
Our fifth honoree is retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Charles Robert Odom. Colonel Odom holds national number Founder 19 and enlisted in the U.S. Army during the buildup of the Vietnam War. He graduated from Officer Candidate School at Fort Lee in Virginia and immediately deployed to Vietnam. Colonel Odom served 1966 to 1986. Sir, if you will please share with us, as you can, a few memories of your tour of duty in Vietnam, as well as comments regarding your service to our nation. And Mrs. Odom, when needed, please feel free to assist.
Thank you. I am Carla Whitehurst Odom, and my husband has asked me to speak for him this evening. He received basic combat training and advanced individual training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, the School of U.S. Armor. And because of 2 classes were scheduled in era for Officer Candidate School, he had the opportunity to choose. Sometimes that happens, and he chose to attend the Quartermaster Officer Candidate School at Fort Lee, Virginia. He graduated from Fort Lee, Virginia as a new second lieutenant, commissioned with his beautiful butter bars just before Christmas in December of 1966, and went immediately to the Republic of Vietnam on January the 30th, 1967. While he was in Vietnam, he was assigned to the Tuy Hoa camp base. He said it was located about 5 kilometers east of Highway 1. I do remember numerous photographs that were taken, and they were, as some gentlemen said, they were in the swamps. Tuy Hoa was on the beach, literally in the sand, with the beach to their rear. And I think of it as an Army wife, that might not have been the most defensible place, because there was no place to go but the water if your camp base was overrun. Thankfully, it wasn't, but there's a little more about that later. While in Tuy Hoa, he was stationed as the officer in charge of an engineer construction material facility, and later for a Class 1 supply facility providing subsistence to garrison troops, to include the 91st Evacuation Hospital, the 203rd Reconnaissance Airplane Company, the 225th Aviation Company, 268th Aviation Company, and the 577th Engineer Battalion. Also, the 1st Brigade, 4th Infantry Division, comprising the 1st Battalion, 8th Infantry, the 3rd Battalion, 8th Infantry, and the 1st Battalion, 12th Infantry, until June of 1967. And then the 173rd Airborne Brigade until November of 1967. They were stationed at Tuy Hoa Air Base. I remember him relating that they had a port facility south of Tuy Hoa, and that was where they received their supplies and much of the food. He was basically in charge of about 100 people as a brand new second lieutenant, and they had a cold storage supply, a dried storage supply, a bakery, a dairy, and an ice cream plant. And the ice cream plant was very important because they would pack the 32 flavors of ice cream in dry ice and ship it out to the troops in the field. It was a wonderful morale booster for people who are being shot at regularly to receive this wonderful treat of American ice cream. And so that was actually a very important function because it helped people stay in touch with reality. Here was a little bit of home. While he was stationed there, I do know that his orders read that he was to leave the day of the Tet Offensive. So that morning, he was ready to leave, only to learn that all the air runways had been crated because they were taking direct hits. It was the Tet. And so casting about for something to do and wondering if he should go back or stay there, a wonderful lieutenant colonel came by and said, "Lieutenant, where are you going?" And he said, "Sir, I need to go to Cameron Bay. I'm on orders for permanent change of station." He said, "Come in the helicopter with me." And so he was airlifted literally out of the middle of the Tet Offensive and taken to the area where he could board an airplane and come home. I had packed his green uniform and shoes and all of the things that he would need to wear as a returning winter soldier and brought them to him when I met him in Hawaii that summer before. And so when he embarked in Seattle, Washington, he was dressed as a regular Army person who had not been overseas. Therefore, he was not singled out at any airports because he looked like a on the ground American troop. He didn't do it for that. He did it because he's cold natured. And sure enough, the first week or two that he was home, every time he was out, his lips would be a little blue because he was very thin. And as those of you who've been there know very well, he was accustomed to the hot weather in Vietnam. He was assigned to the United States Army Test and Evaluation Command in Maryland and promoted to first lieutenant in December of 1967. It was at that time he decided he liked the Army very much and he would apply for a regular Army commission. And he was granted that. And the rest is the rest of about an 18-year history of wonderful service for foreign service back to Thailand in 1970. And we were fortunate to be together as a family in Heidelberg, Germany from 1978 to 1981. He retired from Fort Lee, Virginia after 20 years and 20 days of active duty service. We enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you for this time to share.
Will our attendees please stand for playing of taps? And I'm going to share.
Stand.
Today's honorees will receive the Vietnam War Commemoration Lapel Pin and the National Society Descendants of American Farmers Commemorative Partner Certificate of Valor in the mail. These will be mailed this week, and you should be receiving them to your home shortly thereafter.
To all our honorees, on behalf of my military co-director, Renee Hamilton, as well as myself, and as well as on behalf of a grateful nation, thank you for your service. We greatly appreciate their presence here today, as well as all the officers and members of the National Society Descendants of American Farmers who joined us. Ladies and gentlemen, as is customary, before we part ways today and enjoy our weekend, please join me in a toast. Let us remember all our men and women in uniform, past and present, home and abroad, in peacetime and wartime, all of whom gave some, and far too many of whom gave all, to our veterans. And that concludes our meeting. Thank you very much.
If I
Thank
may
you.
say one comment to Charles Odom, all of my time in the South and down in the Mekong Delta was not in the jungle. Long High, where the 5th Special Forces was based, was a tropical paradise on the beach that is unlike any place you can believe. It was a beautiful French resort down on the coast.